Welcome to Module 4 of the iMonitor training program. Today we turn our attention to a topic that sits at the crossroads of integrity, sustainability and public trust: corruption risks in public procurement for climate and environmental projects. This module will equip you with the tools to identify red flags, understand systemic vulnerabilities, and apply best practices for transparency and accountability. We will explore global case studies, outline 3 common corruption schemes in project delivery, and talk about what to look for when climate and environmental projects are happening in our own neighborhoods. At the start, I'd like to put your attention to the unique and severe consequences of corruption in climate and environmental projects. It is not just about money being spent, money being wasted. It's about trust being broken, progress being delayed, and in some cases, lives and ecosystems being put at risk. The climate crisis is no longer a distant threat. It's a present emergency. From record-breaking heat waves to catastrophic floods, the signs we see around are unmistakable. We are living through the consequences of decades of delay, but we are not powerless. We have the tools, the knowledge, and crucially, the funds to act. Let's start with the scale. According to the Climate Policy Initiative in 2024, global climate finance reached an unprecedented $2.1 trillion. That is a 33% increase from previous year, driven largely by private investments in clean energy, transport, and energy efficiency. The urgency is clear. Every year of delay lacks in higher emissions, greater suffering, and steeper costs. Financing climate and environmental projects is not just a moral imperative, it's an economic one. Climate action creates jobs, boosts innovation, and builds resilience. Every dollar invested in clean energy or nature-based solutions pays dividends in health, security, and prosperity. But even as we mobilize trillions for climate action, we must confront a silent threat. Here is the problem. Where there is big public money and urgency, corruption in public procurement often follows. And in climate projects, the consequences are especially severe. So why are these projects so exposed to corruption? Firstly, they are complex. They often involve new technologies, cross-border funding, and long timelines. That makes it harder to track what is really going on. Secondly, oversight is often weak. In many cases, especially in developing countries, the institutions responsible for monitoring these contracts are under-resourced or politically influenced. And thirdly, there is a pressure to act fast. Climate emergencies don't wait, but with speed trumps transparency, corruption can slip through the cracks. And who pays the price? Ultimately, it's we, the public, who pays. Corruption doesn't just drain budgets. It erodes trust, delays progress, and jeopardizes the very future we are working to protect. If we want climate finance to truly deliver, we must embed transparency, accountability, and citizen oversight into every investment. That means strengthening procurement systems, monitoring projects from start to finish, harnessing technology to detect fraud, and, what is very important, empowering civil society to keep us honest and on track. Now, while we are talking about corruption risks, let's keep two important things in mind. Firstly, just because a project runs into delays, changes, or some irregularities doesn't automatically mean that there is corruption involved. These things can happen for all sorts of reasons: tight deadlines, human error, or simple oversight. And let's not forget, poor execution doesn't always mean corruption. Measures supporting biodiversity, including Natura 2000 sites and climate mitigation, climate adaptation, carry high risks of mistakes. These are not necessarily fraud cases. Often is insufficient documentation, poorly defined measures, but it shows that nature conservation related programs are particularly prone to irregularities. But still, of course, it is always better to stay alert than to be caught off guard. Secondly, when it comes to environmental projects, results aren't always easy to measure. Environmental performance depends on many factors that are often outside the control of the contractor or investor. For example, climate shifts or other nearby developments might change groundwater levels, and that could affect whether newly planted vegetation survives. That is why when we are monitoring public contracts, it is especially important to focus on whether the planned outputs and specific actions are actually delivered, and delivered with the right quality. That is where tools like iMonitor come in. They help us take a more holistic look at contracts and spot potential risks early on. Corruption in climate and environmental projects isn't just a financial issue. It's a threat to our ability to respond to the climate crisis. When funds are stolen or misused, we lose more than money. We lose time, trust, and the chance to build a safer, more sustainable future. So let's treat this issue with the seriousness it deserves. All right, let's jump into the reporting template. Think of this as your guide for monitoring projects. It's laid out in a simple, step-by-step way, so it's easy to follow. There are three main parts. First, we've got the desk analysis. That is basically reviewing the contract details and spotting any risks that might raise eyebrows. Secondly, we look at how the contract is actually being carried out, checking if the project is happening the way it was promised. And thirdly, we focus on the results and impact. As we go through, I will also point out some common corruption tricks to keep an eye on things like payments for work that's substandard or never delivered, contract changes that don't make any sense, that is what people often call scope creep, and shady subcontracting, where fake companies pop up. Knowing these patterns, these corruption schemes, makes it much easier to spot red flags and keep climate and environmental projects accountable. Thank you for taking the time and effort to keep an eye on public procurement and help safeguard climate and environmental projects. When we stay alert to corruption risks, we make sure public resources are used the right way, communities get the protection they need, and together we move toward a more sustainable future. And in our upcoming webinars, we will share even more practical tips and insights on how to strengthen integrity in climate and environmental projects. Thank you.